The Founding Mothers of the United States of America. Part 2. We hear a great deal about the ingenious and venerated Founding Fathers, who revolted against the British to win liberty for the American colonies and crafted a revolutionary new form of democratic government. But behind every great man is a great woman. Despite the many limitations placed on them, women of the day also rose up to support the cause of independence. While the founders were busying themselves with heady matters, women were running their businesses and households, raising their children, making things happen during dinner party politics, and writing words of encouragement and admonitions to remember the ladies. In this 4-part series, we will learn about the lives of the women adjacent to the Founding Fathers of the United States of America, and about 5 other women whose wise and valiant words and actions qualify them to be called the Founding Mothers. Martha Wayles Jefferson. Martha, nicknamed Patty, was the daughter of attorney and slave trader John Wayles and his wife Martha. Patty's mother died when she was young, and her father remarried twice more, but both of her stepmothers also died young. By 13, Martha was the lady of the house. She helped manage her father's business, ran the household, and acted as his social hostess. She knew how to make candles, soap, butter, and remedies for illness. Her father, meanwhile, had an affair with one of the enslaved women he owned, Betty Hemings, who gave birth to several children, including Sally Hemings, who was born when her half-sister Martha was 25. At 18, Martha married lawyer Bathurst Skelton and gave birth to a son, John. 2 years into the marriage, her husband died and Martha returned home with her baby son. John died at the age of 3. Martha's third cousin, Thomas Jefferson, a shy attorney and owner of the nearby Monticello plantation, began courting her. They had many shared interests, including horseback riding, literature, and music. They married on New Year's Day, 1772, and Thomas imported a pianoforte from England to give to her as a wedding present. Their decade of marriage was the happiest period of Thomas's life. Martha read widely and constantly, and the couple had many intellectual discussions and often played music together, Martha on the piano and Thomas on the violin. Martha also took to brewing beer. She produced 170 gallons the year she was married. 2 years into their marriage, Martha's father died, and she inherited 135 enslaved people, including Sally Hemings and her other half-siblings. Thomas put these new enslaved laborers to work building the Monticello residence he had designed. Thomas was also busy attending the Second Continental Congress and writing the Declaration of Independence. He served briefly as a colonel in the Revolutionary War, but was then elected to the Virginia state legislature and later to be governor of Virginia. While serving as First Lady of Virginia, Martha ran a campaign to raise money for the Continental Army per the request of fellow Virginian Martha Washington. During the war, Martha, as the wife of a prominent patriot, was a target for kidnap by the British Army. She was forced to flee the capital of Richmond. The Redcoats later raided Monticello, and Martha was forced to flee with her babies. Martha gave birth to 6 children: John, Martha, Jane, an unnamed son, Mary, Lucy, and Lucy Elizabeth. Tragically, only Martha and Mary lived to adulthood. The other 4 children died in infancy. One, Lucy, while she and her mother were on the run from the British Army. Without the aid of birth control, women of the colonial era could expect to have a child about every 2 years, and, if they survived the ordeal of childbirth, would average 7 births in their lifetime. But with rampant infectious diseases and only primitive medical knowledge, about half of their babies would die in childhood. It has long been believed that with so many children and such a high mortality rate, women of the past must have hardened their hearts to the doom of their offspring. But letters and journals of women of the time make it clear that these children were deeply loved, and the loss of them was heartbreaking to their mothers. Near constant pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding were also very hard on the mother's body. Martha frequently suffered ill health, and Thomas was eager to leave the Continental Congress and refused a diplomatic posting to France to be with his ailing wife. A few months following the birth of her sixth child, Martha died at the age of 33, with her husband at her bedside. Before she passed, Martha made Thomas promise never to remarry, as she couldn't bear to have her children raised by another woman following the ill treatment she had received by her own stepmothers. Thomas was distraught at her death. He locked himself in his study for 3 weeks, and when he finally emerged, he took many long, rambling rides and had frequent outbursts of grief. Thomas went on to become the 3rd President of the United States and outlive his wife by 44 years. He is interred next to her on their Monticello estate. While Jefferson did keep his promise to his wife and never remarried, he did notoriously take a lover, his own wife's half-sister, an enslaved woman named Sally Hemings. Sally's grandmother, Parthena, had been kidnapped in Africa and transported to the New World, where she was owned by Martha Jefferson's maternal family. She was offered as a bedfellow to a visiting British sea captain, John Hemings, and she conceived a child, Betty. Betty, in turn, became the concubine of her owner, Martha Jefferson's father, John Wayles. Betty gave birth to 10 children. The youngest 6 were fathered by Wayles. Her youngest child was Sally. Though Sally and her siblings were 3/4 of European descent, according to the laws of the time, their status followed that of their mother, and thus they were all born into bondage and owned by their father. When John Wayles died, his daughter Martha and her husband Thomas Jefferson inherited his 135 enslaved people, including Betty and Martha's 6 half-siblings. Sally was a toddler at the time and was about 25 years her sister's junior. Because of their origins, the Hemings children and their mother lived in the household and were employed as domestic servants and skilled workers rather than field laborers. They were at the top of the slave hierarchy, but nonetheless, they were held in bondage. In 1784, 2 years after his wife's death, Thomas Jefferson was appointed the American envoy to France. He took his eldest daughter Patsy with him, as well as several enslaved servants, including James Hemings, who trained as a French chef. Jefferson left his younger 2 daughters at home, where the baby, Lucy Elizabeth, soon died of whooping cough. Heartbroken, Jefferson sent for 9-year-old Polly to join him, and 14-year-old Sally was selected to accompany her mistress on the journey. Polly and Sally sailed first to London, where they stayed with Abigail and John Adams, who was serving as ambassador to Britain. Abigail bought both girls new clothes that were more suitable to European fashion rather than Virginia farm life. Sally's life in cosmopolitan Paris was a far cry from her rural origins. Even in the grips of the French Revolution, Paris offered the young girl a whole new world of beauty, history, art, and ideas. In France, slavery was illegal, so Jefferson had to pay his African servants for their work, though not very much. James Hemings received $4 a month and Sally $2, while the average French domestic servant earned $8 to $12 a month. Sally served as lady's maid to the 2 Jefferson daughters and received training in hairdressing and dressmaking in the latest fashion, as well as the French language. When Patsy turned 17 and began attending social outings, Sally attended with her, and Jefferson bought both girls fine clothes to be seen in society. Sally looked a great deal like Martha, her half-sister and Jefferson's beloved late wife. She was described as very fair and decidedly good-looking, with long, straight hair running down her back. And it was during their 2 years in Paris that the 45-year-old Jefferson began a sexual relationship with teenage Sally. As she left behind no letters or journals, we will never know if Sally cared for Jefferson or even consented to the relationship. But whatever her feelings might have been towards Jefferson, she was in no position to refuse this absurdly unbalanced arrangement. At 16, Sally became pregnant. She wanted to remain in Paris, where she and her child would be free when the Jeffersons returned to Virginia. But that would mean never seeing her mother, siblings, or her home ever again. Jefferson promised that if she returned with him to Monticello, he would free her children when they turned 21, and Sally agreed. James Hemings also considered staying behind, but was offered his liberty as well if he trained someone else back at Monticello to cook French cuisine. Back home in Virginia, Sally gave birth to a daughter, Harriet, who died at just a few months old. She went on to have 5 more children: Beverly, Thenia, who died in infancy, Harriet, Madison, and Easton. All were fathered by Jefferson, as it was clear, even during his presidency and other travels, he was always home at Monticello 9 months before Sally had another baby. This relationship was very convenient for the founding father. He got to enjoy the charms of a beautiful young woman who very much resembled his beloved late wife. But he had no social obligation to her. He could stay away doing his important and engrossing work as long as he liked, and expect a warm reception when he was ready to return home. He was also under no constraint to be faithful to Sally, but there is no evidence that he ever slept with any other woman. During Jefferson's vice presidency, he secretly funded a journalist named James Callender to write pamphlets against Jefferson's political enemies, particularly Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. At the time, openly criticizing public figures was illegal, and Callender was imprisoned. Upon his release, he expected Jefferson, newly elected president, to reward him for his service, and requested the position of Postmaster General. But Jefferson refused. In an act of revenge, Callender published a story exposing the president's long relationship with the woman he called Dusky Sally and the African Venus. The scandal Callender hoped would topple Jefferson amounted to nothing, as most people, especially those in the South, had no issue with the common practice of a master coercing his property into a sexual relationship. In Virginia, it was more shocking that Jefferson seemed to treat Sally with a modicum of tenderness and respect. Jefferson remained as popular as ever. After 8 years in office, 66-year-old Jefferson returned home to Monticello, where his daughter Patsy and her 11 children lived with him. Jefferson relished the company and was warm and caring to his white grandchildren, while Sally's son Madison recorded that he never showed affection to his 4 surviving enslaved children. They continued to work as domestic servants, and one visitor to Monticello recorded how shocked he was that the young footman serving dinner bore a striking resemblance to the master of the house. Sally taught her children well, educating them in reading, writing, skilled labor, and hard work, in the hopes that through her sacrifice they would one day lead a better life. When Beverly and Harriet came of age at 21, Jefferson was true to his word and allowed them their liberty. He marked them in his record books as runaways, though he never pursued them as he did others who made a run for their freedom. The brother and sister were 7/8 European and easily integrated into white society. Jefferson died at the age of 83, and his will set his younger sons Madison and Easton free, but made no provision for his longtime mistress. Patsy Jefferson Epps allowed Sally, now in her 50s, informal emancipation, and she was allowed to live in Charlottesville with her younger sons. She died 9 years later at the age of 62. Sally's descendants knew well their origins, and her son Madison gave a newspaper interview recounting his mother's story. But historians denied for centuries that Thomas Jefferson, American hero, could have been involved with an enslaved woman. It was not until 1998 that DNA evidence proved that Jefferson was indeed the father of Sally's children and the ancestor of her 1,000 descendants. In the next episode, we'll meet Eliza Hamilton, who supported Alexander Hamilton through war and politics and preserved his legacy after his murder in a duel. Sarah Livingston Jay, who played politics in Paris as well as her husband and helped secure America's independence. And Dolley Madison, the third and one of the greatest First Ladies, who established the role as that of warm social hostess and serious political matchmaker. A special thank you goes to my patron, Katie McNiff. Don't want to wait to see the rest of the series? Patrons get exclusive early access to all 4 parts now. In fact, I release almost all of my multi-part series on Patreon early. If you would like to become a patron and help me make more fascinating history videos, check out the link in the description. Thank you for watching.